Now on to this week's Spectator Debate. In the magazine this week, we've got a protester's notebook from Trenton, Oldfield, who I'm sure most of you might remember as the fellow who popped up during the Oxford and Cambridge boat race. Trenton, in your notebook and your excellent forthcoming book, you describe the experience inside prison. How did you find it?
Well, prison is many things, and in my experience is different to everybody else's experience, and every prison is different. So I had a 2-month experience in a Category B prison in London at the end of the 21st century. So I want to clarify that when I talk of prison, I don't talk of prison for everybody's experience. I talk about it from my experience. And for me, I had a good experience because there was a lot of solidarity between people in the prison. I had solidarity from both the screws and the prisoners for my action. And because of the press, I was well known from the moment I went in. But I certainly don't advocate for prison, and I argue in the book about the sort of abolition of prison and how we can, how most charities could, instead of focus on reforming prisoners, perhaps look at reforming the institutions that put so many people in prison. You'll know that in the last 10 years, there's been 30% increase of prisoners just in the last 10 years, and in the last generation, over 50%. So we really need to look at prisons. We really need to look at what kind of ideas happen in prison. For me, it was a great experience to kind of come to terms with how there's this criminalization of a group of people, and how it's a continuation of these kind of ideas of a vicious poor that, you put them away. You'll know you can't, on Google Maps, you can't even see prisons. They're kind of like voids in the city. They don't exist.
Can you also tell us a bit about this hilarious letter we got from the police that was offering to help you organise your next protest?
Yes, not only a letter, but an email via my lawyers, some tweets. They seem very keen to assist in any way possible. You'll know what this is about. It's harassment. It's kind of, and if this was happening in many other countries, I'm sure the BBC World Service would be all over the kind of harassment. Look, this guy's done his time. Why are you? Leave them alone. If this was in Iran or North Korea or something, this would be a big issue. But it's part of the sort of total policing concept where they're around you 100% and trying to it's to me it reflects the kind of passive aggressive approach of policing, of kind of and I think it reflects a lot of the culture of kind of passive aggression.
Douglas, one of the things that Trenton was trying to gather with his protest was to highlight the issues against elitism. Do you think it was a success?
Well, no, but if I just quickly pick up on a couple of things that said, I don't, first of all, if the police in North Korea or the police in Iran had tweeted you, I can assure you it would be of absolutely no interest to the North Korean or Iranian media, and they would not be picking up your case. Far from harassment, as far as I can see from your account and your notebook and just now, the police were being exceedingly helpful and rather kind. They wanted to assist you if you had any further protest inquiries, and I mean that simply shows once again the degeneration of the British police, who simply find it a lot easier these days to police Twitter than they do. It's far more restful to write to Trenton and ask if they can assist him in any future protests than it is to, say, catch rapists and murderers. The police have been reduced to this, and it's obvious why. It's just a lot more pleasant for them. As to whether or not Trenton's protest did anything, of course not. Of course it didn't. It just simply created a huge public nuisance. A lot of people who'd spent a lot of time putting in a lot of hard work to train for a major event in their careers had their days ruined by this thoughtless act of vandalism. It didn't do anything about elitism. It didn't highlight elitism. Any claims that Trenton has made about, I don't know, I think one of your claims, you can correct me if I'm wrong, was that too many people in the cabinet for your liking went to Oxford or Cambridge. Oxford and Cambridge are elite institutions because people work to get there, and if they get in, they are then likely to be the sort of people who you'd want to be forming a government. But if you think that there has to be a certain quota of people from Swansea University or from any other institution, then I suppose that's your opinion. But why you would wish to force that on the general public, create a public nuisance and wreck a lot of young sportsmen's early careers, I suppose that's up to you.
I mean, what can you say? I guess that was a predictable response, but I don't really. I mean, I don't know what your interpretation of elitism is, but and in terms of successes, I believe somebody has told me that over 500,000 people put the word elitism into Google that day. I think close to 500,000 people went on that blog post that I did, which sort of explained some of the issues of elitism. A week later, Doreen Norris came out and spoke about called them the leaders of the Tory party didn't know the price of milk and they were tough boys.
You think Nadine Dorries was inspired by you?
Well, I'm just saying, I think maybe there's room within these actions. And then a week later was the Grand Prix in Bahrain, which there was a huge amount of discussion around sport and the role of sport.
Yeah, and the difference is, of course, is that the British government isn't gunning down British citizens on the streets of London. The Bahraini government was doing a fair amount of that in Bahrain, so there was some legitimacy for protest. I live
in a borough where there's 1 in 2 children live in poverty.
Yeah, nobody's being shot by the government, though. You're not trying to create a parity between the British government and the Bahraini government.
That's not what I'm doing, and you're trying to suggest that I am.
It was you who threw the comparison.
I'm not throwing. I didn't throw a comparison, actually. What I said was that it brought a lot of attention on the issue. But I didn't do that.
I have to say, I mean, I'm not surprised by this, but that kind of fatal generational narcissism seems to be rearing its head in your person. Because,
do you know
because one of the things is, Trenton, if I can just say so, is that you interpret all of these things from your own actions. I mean, it's perfectly possible that Nadine Dorries already had these views in her head before.
Oh, no doubt.
Before you leapt in the river. It's perfectly possible that people noticed and disliked the Bahraini government gunning down the people of Bahrain before you jumped in the river. And as for prison, I'm delighted it was a nice experience for you, but it seems to all be about you. And do you not worry that?
Do you know what? In the 3 days before my protest, 3 major things happened in the Houses of Parliament, the Palace of Westminster. The introduction of the Communications Data Bill, which I think most of us here would agree is a very, very serious piece of legislation. Secondly, the Queen had given royal assent to the privatisation of the NHS. And then on the 3rd day, the Minister for the Olympics suggested that people should shop their neighbours if they thought they were going to protest at the Olympics. To me, this wasn't about me. This is actually about the next generation. It's got absolutely nothing to do with me. What's happening is there is a major attack on people, on civil liberties, on our level of life. I mean, to have 1 in 2 people in Tower Hamlets living in poverty, right on the edge in between Canary Wharf and the City of London. This wasn't about me at all. This was a very bodily experience reaction to 3 very serious claims by people in the Palace of Westminster that are meant to be representing us, but are actually not representing us, or representing, we know who they're representing. They're not representing the people.
Who are they representing?
Well, I think we can see the vested interests in the privatisation of the NHS. Many of the people in the cabinet have shares in companies that can benefit from the sale of the NHS, etc. These are very serious issues.
Right.
These are incredibly serious issues. And if you have a bodily experience to this level of
we all have a bodily experience.
Poverty,
I don't know what you mean,
if you're riding your bike around Tower Hamlets and you can see this poverty, and you have to do something.
Yeah, all sorts of people do feel they have to do something. First of all, most people go to the ballot box and they vote, and they vote for elected representatives.
We know
you seem to think that process doesn't happen.
There's a massive deficit of democracy. It's
considerable deficits for democracy in this country, as there are most developed democracies. The question is, first of all, whether the best way to deal with that is to try to jump in a river and talk about elitism. The second thing is whether or not a useful way to deal with this is to take part in the normal process of democratic discussion instead of becoming a public nuisance. And you decided, instead of being part of the normal democratic debate and discussion, to become a public nuisance.
May I? I'm not sure if you know this or not, but since I've been in the United Kingdom, I've spent my entire working life working on these issues, doing it in the most thorough, expected, polite. I've been on every single march. I went on the anti-war march where 2 million people were.
You're rolling up.
No, but these are the democratic deficits of why I ended up doing a direct action protest. And this is why people do direct action protests, because of the deficit in democracy, because of these failures of democracy. And what we're saying when we do these actions is, hang on, pallets of Westminster, you need to catch up. You need to catch up with these issues. We need direct democracy. We don't need representational democracy anymore. We
don't need representational democracy.
We need direct democracy. People are living in poverty in this country. Poverty. This is one of the wealthiest. They're not. One in two children in Tower Hamlets are living in poverty.
It's the same thing as with your elastic definition of elitism. Poverty is an elastically defined thing in your lexicon now.
It might be for you.
No, it's not
but
for me.
It's pretty clear for people. It's pretty clear for people that are living in poverty in one of the most affluent countries in the world.
Believe me, it's not. The definition of poverty has changed so much over recent years, and you may well define poverty in a wholly new way, but it is not a way that most people around the world would understand poverty.
I think people around the world, and I think most people, if you wake up in the morning in Britain, you know what's going on. You know this situation. You know you're losing your rights. You know you're losing your ability to make.
I don't think people do know that, Trenton. You make a huge leap of ideas, and just get back to this thing that the representative democracy is not what we need now. What is, instead, two questions really I have for you. One is, what is your ideal of democracy then for the 21st century? And secondly, do you think that what you did in what you call as direct protest action is something that everyone else should do? And where and when would that stop?
I'm surprised more people don't in Britain. Do
you think they should?
I write in my book about this kind of. I have a feeling, and there's a kind of a Stockholm syndrome here, a kind of a cultural Stockholm syndrome, where people have been so abused for so long that they have sympathy for an extreme word, oppressor.
Who are our oppressors?
Names, come on. No, it's not about names. It's about a culture. It's about a culture of how, if you stick your head up like I did, it gets chopped. And people have learned.
The system, including the British police, worked very hard to make sure your head, which you put under the chopping direction, didn't get chopped. You were saved actually by British authorities, including people who I suppose you would think of as elitists.
Nobody saved myself. There was no danger to myself. This has been made very clear in court. There was no danger to myself. But elitism to me, if you wanted to, I think that was your first question. Elitism is a very simple concept of some people feeling like they're better than others. It's very straightforward.
That's your definition.
This is the concept of elitism.
In that case, you just keep jumping in rivers until there's no one who thinks they're better than anyone else. And all sorts of people think they're better than other people. There are a lot of people who would live in what you would probably describe as poverty who think they're better than other people. So how are you going to deal with that?
This is what I'm talking about. The way that society has set up our situation, where we don't believe that we're the same as each other, that we're not all human. The colonial project.
Colonialism?
Yes.
Okay.
This is really important. This is really important.
Of the many issues you sort of throw out. Is your aim? I can't keep up with the kind of throwing out of absolutely everything of sort of post-colonialist studies.
It's not post-colonial. It's still continuing colonialism
created in you. But look, just to stick to one example of this, is it really the case that you think that until nobody in Britain thinks they're better than anyone else, we will be an elitist society?
What I suggest, and I think your first question was like, what do I propose? No, this is what I propose is that we work, instead of having a lens of competition and separation, which is what informs our everyday life. So we put on the lens of equality. So every policy, everything that we do works towards equality. So
what is equality? Equality of what? Equality of outcome, equality of opportunity, equality of economics, equality in sport? Does everybody have to reach the finish line at the Olympics at the same time?
Well, I have no interest in the Olympics or commenting on the Olympics, but what I'm suggesting is if we put on this lens of equality in all our attributes, rather than separation and trying to say that we're better, that there's a hierarchy and that we're at the top and these people at the bottom, like this creation of a criminal class in prison where they're at the bottom and everybody can kick us around. I'm also one of those people. What I'm suggesting is if we put on this lens of equality, everything that we do works towards that. But every policy, every human relation, how can we make this more equal? How can we work towards making these situations between us a more equal position?
I have to
then I think through that we'll find the process of, if we have to use this word, reforming, rather than continuing in the...
And do we go to the ballot box or not?
I imagine there would be situations where ballot boxes would be...
And it's amazing. I think the LSE should be deeply ashamed that somebody graduated from there with so many dim ideas in one head.
I would just like to jump in and bring this together. I'd just like to ask you both to summarise it up. The politics of protest, obviously, no doubt you've both expressed your views here. Trenton, what do you see as the theme going forward for the protest? You know, you said you've been very involved in protests in the past. What's going to change, if anything, over the next few years on this front?
Well, I mean, I think we've seen yesterday, the criminalisation of protests at the University of Sussex. There's a huge criminalisation, and as the inequalities increase, the criminalisation of protest is going to increase as well. They're inevitable.
Douglas?
I don't know what to say. I mean, there have been so many things thrown up by Trenton in this amazing, confused system. But I would just observe that everyone in this country, I think, would like to see and tries to see something like equality of opportunity. Equality of opportunity means that whatever the background you're born into, if you work, you can end up going to a good school, you can end up going to a good university, you can end up with a good job. Everyone believes in equality of opportunity. The fact is, however, is that anybody past puberty really tends to notice that you cannot create equality of outcome because people have different skills, different benefits, different abilities, different all sorts of things. And along the way, you have to cope with that terrible thing that Trenton ignores, which is human nature. And you cannot legislate human nature. You will never make people perfect. You will never create a society, Trenton, however many rivers you jump in, however many young athletes' lives you try to spoil. You will never create a society where nobody in Britain or any other country doesn't feel slightly better than somebody else who they dislike.
Douglas, what's your moment of the week?
Well, I suppose coming up to Easter, it's the progress from Maundy Thursday and Good Friday into Easter Day itself on Sunday.
It's interesting because we've got a leader in this week's Spectator about the importance of Easter. Now, you're an atheist. What do you find special about Good Friday and the Easter period?
Well, I think that Easter has that quality which Christmas has still got, but perhaps has been diminished by the sort of commercial, shall we say, aspects of it. Easter, despite attempts to sort of persuade us that Easter is really about just eating as many chocolate eggs as you can in 24 hours, is only something with a point if you at least read through and consider the story again. And I think that believers and non-believers like myself can do well to think of this extraordinary story, which, even if you don't think it's literally true, is a story of amazing power, which still has a force that I think people could do with and learn from.
How many other religious festivities around the year do you think have remained untainted, or is Easter just it?
Well, Easter isn't untainted. It's just, as I say, the sort of tainting isn't particularly persuasive, really. There are lots of parts of the church's year, which, of course, you don't see huge sort of commercial possibilities around the Feast of the Annunciation, for instance. But I think that Easter, there's a sort of, let's say, secular society seem to be quite good at doing Christmas to their satisfaction, but Easter slightly confuses, and I sort of think of that thing. I often quote Jürgen Habermas, German philosopher, who talks about these moments when religion intrudes uncomfortably onto the modern world and onto our secular space. And I think Easter is an example of that. We're not quite sure what to do with it. So, in my view at any rate, you simply remember the story again.